The federal government's move to suspend live cattle exports to Indonesia has sent shockwaves through rural Queensland. It's put in limbo a $100 million trade that supports 1,200 jobs in this state. The decision was made after Four Corners broadcast images of cattle being tortured. The rural lobby group Agforce says it strongly opposes any form of animal cruelty, but an export ban isn't the answer. Andrew Simpson is the organisation's cattle policy director. I spoke with him earlier. Andrew Simpson, what did you think when you saw the Four Corners footage?
I think, like every producer, every member of our community, I was shocked. And I think the overwhelming reaction that this was happening in a consumer market of ours was to question how it could have occurred.
Given your shock, why doesn't Agforce support the suspension of live cattle exports to Indonesia?
The immediate reaction of industry was to respond with a package that was to limit the amount of processors in Indonesia to 25 plants, and that by doing that we could take away the chance that animals were being processed through rogue operators. And the immediate suspension of live export to Indonesia wasn't going to be a solution. By having an Australian presence in Indonesia, by having a control on the plants that we're working through, was our ability to at least be a monitor.
But the fact that we even saw those scenes on Four Corners, doesn't that suggest that that monitoring hasn't worked?
Certainly. I think in some elements of Indonesia it hasn't, as that footage proved. But we're looking at 4 abattoirs over a total of 700, and the immediate industry response was to limit that to 25 plants, and through that have a monitor from Australia on site so that we could be in control. To leave straight away, to retreat back to Australia and say we're not going to be there, gives us no ability to do that.
But don't you want to be absolutely confident that that sort of mistreatment isn't happening in any other abattoir?
Certainly. And if you look at the Australian system that is confined from a ship through to a feedlot, even the footage that we saw 2 weeks ago upheld the standards that Australian farmers report to provide, and that is animal care and animal welfare. Unfortunately, we have been let down by 4 plants outside of that system, and as an industry, our responsibility is to limit that.
You asked this question yourself just before. How could this happen?
There's a lot of operators in Indonesia that have had systems in place outside of our control. And over the years, whilst there have been a developed and programmed response to trying to lift that standard, obviously it hasn't been able to be complete. And I think whilst that graphic footage brought it to our blunt awareness that it's still going on, we've got to take control of that.
What's happening to the Queensland cattle now that are unable to be shipped overseas?
The ramifications of this are huge. It's not just about the cattle that can't go to Indonesia, it's about where those cattle go now. We're fortunate in some ways. We've had a season that's been able to protect a part of those producers, that they can hold their cattle a little longer. But inevitably they're going to have to come back through systems further south, and that's going to put huge pressures on transport, on processes and on communities as we find that diversity. But ultimately the impact on cash receipts and returns to farmers is going to be devastating. And I don't just limit that to the north of Australia. This is a national issue, because that will ripple across all of the states, not just in cattle movement but in meat movement as well.
You're talking about a meat glut?
Potentially, yes. Ultimately, if we say today 520,000 cattle can't go to Indonesia, those 520,000 cattle have got to come back through the system in some form and sometime soon. And I liken 500,000 cattle to 1 million rumps hitting our domestic market. And there's only so much the domestic market can absorb at a price which is commensurate with what the farmer needs to survive. And if you're talking about a glut, the first response is to undercut prices, to limit the ability of a farmer to sustain his living. And that's the real concern.
Andrew Simpson, thank you.
Thank you very much.